approaches to linguistics. Broadly, we talk about the traditional grammar and what happens after that. Traditional approach to language study. And it's a rather vague word. What is traditional? Traditional grammar. Again, this is here, when we talk about traditional grammar, we are talking specifically about English language. Malayalam language will have a different history in this aspect. We too had that. As I said, Malayalam language was supposed to, there was an attempt to Sanskritize Malayalam. So many of the Malayalam words we have been Sanskritized. And the original Malayalam word is now hardly visible. Jyoti is a Sanskritized version of Chodi, for example. So there was this concept that some languages were more noble, and there were many inferior languages. And these inferior languages have to kind of follow the rules of the noble language. So that was there in India, that was there in Kerala, that was there in England as well. So Latin was considered to be an elite language, a kind of noble language, and English, which was essentially the mother tongue of the 99.99% people living in England in the 17th, 18th century, was considered to be inferior. It's very, very ridiculous to think of that. And there are many, people who talk about Shakespeare as an authority of English. In those days, English was not considered respectable. That's a funny thing. Though many writers were writing a lot in English, and that wealth is still there, English did not have much respect at that time. Among the scholars, they considered Latin and Greek to be very elitish languages. So in traditional grammar, until the early years of 20th century, I would say, or little before that, English, even into the 20th century, maybe 1920, etc., English was studied in the same manner as they would study Latin. Latin was, so in traditional grammar, the emphasis was on the written language. The emphasis was on the written language. So that is why modern linguistics is very different. So far, we have been talking about linguistics. We have been talking about modern linguistics, post 1930s or something like that. So before that, linguistics was again very conservative, very, very prescriptive in its outlook. So the rules of traditional grammar were Latin-based, and scholars like Ben Jonson, who wrote the earliest treatise on grammar, were deeply learned in classical languages like Greek and Latin. So they were kind of apologetic to English, and they tried to make English more structured by giving it a grammar. There were grammar books in Latin and Greek, but there was no grammar book for English. So that was artificially created later by English philologists, so that English will also be a respectable language. And we in India very religiously follow these grammar books and get into deep trouble. So that is traditional grammar. So points to remember is traditional grammar were largely based on Latin, and Latin is a dead language. Latin rules are fixed because it doesn't change at all. English is a living language, Malayalam is a living language, so it is very difficult to fix the pronunciation or grammar or vocabulary of Malayalam, because the vocabulary of today will be redundant, and 10 years from now, people may have different words for some of the words that we use now. Words die and new words come. Grammatical structures die and new structures come. Even pronunciation might change over time. That happens to living languages. But Latin, being a language that is not used for actual communication, just as Sanskrit is not used for actual communication, just as Hebrew is not used for actual communication, just as Syriac is not used anywhere for actual communication, those languages will be fixed. They will have fixed rules, they will not change in any manner. Particularly in the texts that we have, which are scholarly texts, the language will be a kind of standard thing. And when we apply the rules of these to a living language like English, we get into trouble, and we do not benefit from that. That is what is happening. So they were focusing on these dead languages, the rules and structures of these Latin and Greek, etc. And again, they were also looking at the written language. So they gave a lot of emphasis on grammar, on the written aspect, and they stressed on rote learning, and they did not accept any language variety. And here, there's another important point that Dr. Murali has put into the material. Traditional grammar overlooked the distinction between the notion of form, function, and meaning. What are form, function, and meaning? Form is the shape or the morphological aspect of a word. The formal thing. It can be syntactic also. Rama had his supper. The appearance of these words, Rama had his supper, the appearance of these words is the formal aspect, or what we call grammar of it. But the function it performs might be different. I'll give you another example. I'm saying that, so suppose, imagine, unfortunately, we are all sitting in different parts of the district, or maybe even beyond that. Suppose we were all in the same room, and I am saying how hot it is. So many of you would remain the same. You would sympathize with me. Oh, he is feeling very hot. What can we do? But a couple of you might think, wonder if what I said might have another meaning. The form of my utterance is how hot it is. It is an exclamatory sentence. That is the formal feature of that sentence. But I might imply that it's very hot and I want to go out. I want to stop the class. Maybe that is a significance I have. That is a function of this sentence, something that Chomsky would later call the deep structure of that sentence. I could also mean that it may be a request asking you to switch on the fan. So some of you might understand that and would volunteer to switch on the fan. My statement was how hot it is. The impact is someone understands that sir wants to leave the room. Some people understand that he wants the fan to be turned on. And again, in another context, the same sentence, how hot it is, exclamatory sentence, could have the meaning of, can you open the windows so that more air will come in? So that's the difference between form and function. A statement that I make could have a formal feature, which is a surface structure. Deep within it could serve many functions. So the same formal feature could have many functions. So the functions could be different. That is the form and function. So today we talk about functional grammar. And people who write the functional grammar text also do not have a clarity about what function they are serving. That is why these functional grammar books do not seem to be very helpful to us. And then we have meaning, the essential meaning ultimately that is conveyed, or whether, if at all, essential meaning exists, whatever. So form, function, and meaning are important. In traditional times, meaning was given a lot of importance. So they studied meaning very with a lot of care. But today we don't give much importance to meaning. We are bothered about the function, and the meaning is conveyed differently. We have not much control over it. So the traditional grammar did not bother much about the distinction between form, function, and meaning. Therefore, their definition of word classes, parts of speech in traditional grammar, is unsatisfactory. So even today, now we learn this, parts of speech, which are we learn it religiously. And if you do not know whether a word is a noun or not, you are classified as an ignoramus. So if you are not able to identify an adjective, then you would be considered having zero knowledge in English. But actually, you might be very proficient in the language and you may be communicating very well, but you're not able to perform this function. That is the modern, even today we have that way of judging people. We talk about the parts of speech, which is basically nonsense, because your conscious awareness of parts of speech doesn't help you in any way in communicating. That's a different story. But this is the traditional grammar thing, that is the parts of speech idea. These classifications are based on a single criterion. For example, noun is defined as the name of a thing, person, or place. But what about love? Love is not a thing. Love is not a place. Love is not a person. The word distinction, it is not a person. Equality is not a place. Equality is not a thing. Still, they are nouns. So, by that definition, you do not attain a full understanding. So that can be said about verb also. See, a verb is said to be word denoting action. What about destruction? Destroy is a verb, but destruction is a noun. How do you explain all these things? So I am saying that this knowledge is useful. For example, now my meta-linguistic knowledge came out when I said destroy is a verb and destruction is a noun. But actually, this knowledge, the awareness of this should come after you master the language. That is not a way to master the language. Today, the problem with grammar today is that we structure all these rules and we teach the rules, believing that learning the rules will make you better communicators in the language. That won't happen. These knowledge of these rules should be unconscious. That is what we are going to say very soon. A break to this sequence, a break to all these notions about language, that language is primarily written, language should be structured, or English should be structured in the following the rules of Latin, that that English words can be classified in the same manner as we classify Latin words, etc. A total break came through the early work of Leonard Bloomfield and Ferdinand de Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure and Leonard Bloomfield, two early names, and Zelig Harris is another person. We'll learn more about them soon. So I'll read. A break to the sequence came with the advent of eminent anthropologists and linguists like Leonard Bloomfield and Ferdinand de Saussure. Linguistics during this period aimed at describing each language in its own terms and merits. See, look at this. The spoken form of the language was given substantial importance. This is modern linguistics. The spoken form, dialects and registers became significant. Dialects and registers are different varieties. We will be talking about them more later. Linguists began to generalize about which sounds were common in languages of the world, and etc. And here you have Zelig Harris. In his book, Methods of Structural Linguistics, proposed an analysis of language. The use of meaning in the description of various grammar categories were rejected. Saussure, in Cours de Linguistique Générale, or a course in general linguistics, discussed such concepts as synchrony and diachrony, langue and parole, etc. All these things we will be looking at in detail later. Langue and parole, diachrony and synchrony. And then Noam Chomsky came with his cognitive approach, which is psychological approach, and revolutionized the knowledge of language. You remember, Chomsky is still alive, so it is pretty recent. The big changes in linguistic study in Europe happened relatively recently, maybe after the Second World War. In the second half of 20th century, in the 60s, 70s, you had major insights into how language worked. So modern very often the problem with us is that we still follow the pre-colonial days when the methods of teaching English that the British people followed some 80 years back. They changed long back, but we still cling on to those things. That is one problem we have, which hinders our acquisition of English language, but that's a different topic. We'll be doing that more in the fourth semester when we study the teaching of English. So here, these things, structuralists like Bloomfield and Saussure and Zelig Harris, they made a major contribution to the transition from traditionalism to modern approaches to linguistic study. But Chomsky was the person who, made the biggest difference when he came up with his notions about cognitive psychology. And he disproved many things that the structuralists like Harris said, and he added to them, made them rich. But that doesn't make any of these, even the traditional approach, the approach of the structuralist, approach of Chomsky, none of these things are totally good or bad. We are interested in this as objective, impartial scholars, and we will make use of all this knowledge, accept what is acceptable, which has been tested by time, and reject those things which did not stand the test of time. Just points. One is explicit and tacit knowledge, which is something we already hinted at. Linguistic knowledge is not often explicit. So that is, you are a good user of Malayalam. So when I speak Malayalam in a wrong way, you will immediately be able to say you are wrong. And this is the way it should be said. So suppose I make a wrong sentence in Malayalam, which has an absurd meaning. And you, being a good user of Malayalam, will tell me that is not the way it should be said. This is the way it should be said. That is good. You have that tacit knowledge, deep knowledge in your brain. You know exactly how it should be said. That is enough. You need not be able to explain what went wrong. I am not interested in what went wrong. When I make a wrong statement, you correct me. I am only bothered about correcting myself and seeing that next time I use the right sentence so I get the right impact. I am not worried about the exactly what happened. That is how it generally works in language. You make a wrong statement, you hear somebody saying the right statement and having the acquired effect, the desired effect, and you change accordingly. That is how you make mistakes and then you correct. You don't always need the detailed linguistics. So in English, unfortunately, when you make a mistake, you expect somebody to tell you what exactly went wrong. Like saying that, see, you should have used the present perfect structure there. You have forgotten to use the infinitive there. That is the passive form. This kind of meta-linguistic knowledge is expected, which is what has led us in the wrong path for long. Your knowledge is tacit. It is unconscious. It is implicit. It is hidden in your brain. You need not know exactly what happened. Who should know that? A linguist should know that. A specialist in the area should know what went wrong, because that is his area. A normal human being, two normal human beings trying to communicate in English need not have that meta-linguistic knowledge to explain what went wrong. That kind of a knowledge is not expected from you. When we try to learn Hindi, we wouldn't do that. When we try to learn Tamil, we wouldn't do that. But when trying to learn English, we still do that because the traditional grammar still hangs around in our environment a lot. That is why we are worried about it much. So explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge. Explicit is when you are able to explicitly tell others how language works. That is a useful information, but you don't need that. An ordinary speaker doesn't need that. For example, suppose I am a mechanic. I work with cars and machines, and I work in Canada. And what do I need? I don't need need to have the ability to say why a sentence is right and wrong. My only need is to say the right thing so that my customers are happy. So after I make a mistake, I see a frown on the customer's face. I'm alert, and next time I hear somebody else speak the same context, I pick up, I correct, and I work like that. I don't need a teacher to tell me, here you have used the wrong tense. That kind of word is not needed for me. But who needs explicit knowledge of grammar? A grammarian, an English language teacher needs that. An English language student also needs that, but not a botany student or a commerce student. Everybody needs to speak English correctly without mistakes, but the knowledge of how language works and the ability to talk about language is a totally different thing. That is explicit and tacit knowledge of things. And then the difference between utterance and sentences. Sentences are the written kind of correct thing that you talk about. And utterances are actual things that happen in life. You make many utterances, and all these utterances need not be logical sentences. And for example, here, officers is busy with work is an utterance. So when you correct it, it becomes officers are busy. Basically, utterances and sentences are the same, but here a difference is drawn so that we'll understand it better. So all the sentences that we make in our speech can be said to be utterances, and all need not be acceptable or grammatical. And this takes us to linguistic competence and linguistic performance. Our knowledge of the language is our competence, which may be much more than our ability to perform. So I would say everybody who are attending this program and most of the educated people in Kerala have a reasonably high linguistic competence in English. But on performance level, you have problem. Actually, that is a minor problem. If you have the right approach, you can easily rectify that and become good performers in English. But our notions, many notions prevent us from attaining that, but we will look at them later. So Chomsky was a person who drew the distinction between linguistic competence and linguistic performance. So the theory of linguistic competence is what we call grammar of the language. So that the competence is the underlying rules. Again, the implicit silent kind of thing. And performance is the real avishkar of that knowledge. A theory of performance describes the psychological processes involved in using one linguistic competence. One's is not one linguistic, one's linguistic competence.